Okay, and today we're going to look at Psalms 24. But before I do, I'm just going to let you know that today I have an audience. They should be okay. Okay, pay attention, guys. All right, there we go. And today we're looking at Psalms 24. This is one of those, again, it's one of those earthy, pastoral, large, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We've seen this a couple of times where he's talked about how the universe belongs to God. And this is, again, the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, and he has founded upon the seas and established this on the floods. The idea that he is the supreme God over creation. And we see this sometimes, like we've said earlier, there are psalms that are about hardship, psalms that are about joy, and then there are psalms about kingness and provision and security and shield, and this one is about majesty. And it's a very strong, majestic, who can ascend into the hill of the Lord, and who can stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart. This is a generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and lift up your everlasting doors. The King of glory has come. There's something very ethereal and worshipful about this psalm. And it's interesting that it comes right on the heel of Psalms 23. I don't know how they arrange these psalms. I don't know if they're in any kind of sequential order, if they're moving into a flow. You seem to see the emotions are up, then they're down, then they're up. And maybe there's nothing to that. Maybe they were just put together. But I tend to think that God is good. And there is a sense of flow through this, of meter and pentameter, of ups and downs, of highs and lows. And you'll find them staying within a certain range of joy and sorrow. And so this is one of those very majestic ones. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even unto them your everlasting doors. You'll see a repeating sequence also. It's almost like this is almost similar to what we would call a hymn, where you have a chorus and then you'll have a verse and then a chorus and then another verse, then a chorus. And here you've got them repeating twice. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and lift them up, O ye everlasting doors. Maybe he was on a hillside or sitting under the stars and just making this beautiful hymn to God. So it's a very beautiful song. When we go back to 47 and 48, we're kind of putting a capstone on this story because Joseph has revealed himself. He has now brought his family into Goshen. There's still 5 years yet to go in this famine. And again, we talked about cycles, that God doesn't just have things happen, boom, 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 that there's a cycle of things. Because we live in a world that cycles, the weather moves in cycles. Maybe after the flood, before the flood, things had smaller cycles, smaller temperature changes. But here now we have more drastic temperature changes, and this will affect climates. And this will affect crops, and this will affect, the weather. So the idea that there was 7 good and 7 bad, it seems like there's a balance going on. If you know anything about the first law of thermodynamics, it's conservation, that what one has, the other one doesn't have, and there's fighting for balance. There's fighting for equilibrium. And that's what energy is. We cannot create or destroy energy. It just goes from matter to energy or energy to matter. But it's always a form of conservation. Well, we can destroy. There is the second law of thermodynamics where things decay. But as the energy decays, so does the mass and so does the energy. Just in small bits, but nonetheless, where does all that energy go? Nobody knows. Not even scientists know this. But there's always, those two forces are working together. One of them conserves what you have. The other one realizes you're losing. So there's always a trying to create a balance. And so when you see this in a larger way through the world, you'll see that the world is always fighting for balance because it's always losing energy. Where the energy is going, nobody knows. And yet, so we have this happening. It's going to be 5 more years. Pharaoh gives them the best of the land. They get up to Goshen, which Goshen is over near, like if this is Egypt and here's the Mediterranean up here, then it's up in this area along the top. It's along the fertile side. It's a very fertile, beautiful ground. We'll see later that, this is where they are even at the time of the Exodus, although they are not the property and the strong land holdings They're now made slaves 400 years later. But here, they're given the best of the land. And Pharaoh talks with Jacob. And here you get, I mean, what a meeting that would have been. The patriarch and the king sitting together and talking. Do you think Jacob ever thought he would talk to a ruler, to the Pharaoh? I mean, this is a big thing that the father of Joseph would get, that any man would get to sit in the court of the Pharaoh. And he sits and shares his testimony, shares his life, that here is what my life has been, 130 years, few and evil were the days of my life. But I never attained to the days of my father. So my fathers lived longer than I did. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now listen, that's crazy. There's the sense that Jacob also wears on him a sense of priesthood, that God blesses Abraham. Abraham blesses Isaac. Isaac versus Jacob. Jacob's going to bless his son in about a chapter. But we see that it also gives minor blessings to people along the way. So he blesses. And Jacob placed his father, and Joseph placed his father and brethren and gave them possession in the land. And he nourished his father and his brethren. He took care of his family in Goshen. And the famine, there was no bread in the land. And Joseph gathered up all the money that could be found, and he started purchasing. He started purchasing land, and then he started purchasing people. He started purchasing for Pharaoh, not for himself. And he's not creating slaves here. I mean, many of the times when we go to banks to borrow money, we're indenturing ourselves. We're saying, I want to borrow this money for this car or this house, and then I'm going to work and give you the money that I'm making to pay back this loan. So in a sense, we are indenturing ourselves to debt. We are becoming a servant to this lender. So we kind of have to look at it like that. He wasn't taking everything. They weren't out in the fields. This wasn't, 19th century American slavery. But you're going to have to pay, and you're going to have to pay back the one who is taking care of you. And this is the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is taking care of you. You're borrowing money from him, so therefore you're going to have to pay that back. So that it's an equitable exchange. And we realize that there's a certain level of justice to this. There's a certain level of justice to the fact that when we had a sin debt, it wasn't just easy to forgive, and someone had to pay. And then we owe the person that pays the debt. So there's always a sense of justice when another person is getting something for what they've been provided for us. It's free to us, but it wasn't free to Jesus. So the people started giving. They started first to give the land, then they gave the cattle, then they gave their lands. Then they started giving of themselves, that we will indenture ourselves to Pharaoh. And they did this. He didn't touch the land of the priests that were there. He had respect for the religion that was there. And Joseph said, behold, I've bought you this day your land for Pharaoh, and here is seed for you, and you can sow in the land. So now they're going to sow into this land that belongs to Pharaoh, but they're going to get to keep some of the increase. This isn't just all for Pharaoh. You're going to work Pharaoh's land, and you're going to bring Pharaoh his money, and then buy yourself out. So it's an equitable economic exchange. I know helping the poor, giving them free is fine, and helping people who are in need and giving freely, but economically, people need to pay, and there needs to be reciprocity. There needs to be a balance, because this is how you keep an economy flowing. Free money doesn't create economy. You need economy with money moving back and forth. So instead of just giving money out and giving money out, that money needs to come back to stimulate the economy. It was a very strong economic move he's doing here, not just with Egypt, but with all the nations. And so it came to pass that you shall give a fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own. Okay, you give him 20% of what you make a year. You keep you live on the other 80. So that's how that's working. And they, instead of them getting angry that they have to pay 20%, they looked at him with gratitude. You've saved our lives. Of course we'll pay 20. We have no problem with doing this. And they were joyous that someone would come and save, would be their salvation. Joseph is the salvation of the nations. And who is the coming Joseph? It'll be Jesus as the salvation of the nations. When Jesus comes, he will be like Joseph to save the nations and to take care of the nations. He's not going to get here and just, sit in the church and sing hymns to himself. He's going to be a part of the the world as he sets right things that we have taken wrong. And so give Pharaoh a fifth part. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. This is one of the first times that Israel is named both for Israel as the man, but Israel as the nation. Now we're seeing Israel mentioned as a nation. And Israel dwelt in the land of Goshen. And they, there was the word they, remember we're empirical here, we're evidentiary. Israel and they. So this is a nation we're talking about. It's one of the first times. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. Here we are. We talked about Israel, they. Now we're talking about Jacob, and lived 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And he drew nigh that he must die. And he called Joseph and said, if I found grace in thy sight, I pray thee, put thy hand under my thigh and deal truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. He wants to be buried back. Remember that all of his family, except for Rachel, was buried in Mamre, which is up in Canaan. And the only reason Rachel wasn't buried there is because she died over in Bethlehem. No besmirching on her. That's just where they were when she died. I don't think they, could have trafficked with the body or something like that. But you get the idea. Take him back, and he swear to me, and I'll swear. In 48, we start the blessings. And again, we're seeing this happening again and again, that there's blessings to Abraham from God, blessings from Abraham to Isaac, blessings from Isaac to Jacob. Now, Jacob's going to bless to the 12 sons. But he doesn't just bless equally. He blesses also kind of on how the type of personality they've been. You're going to see in a minute that he mentions some sins. And then he mentions personalities. And many of this is the personality of the person, but also the personality of that nation within Israel later on. We'll see that those personality traits many times become dominant of that group. So he goes in to bless, and he calls them all together, and he blesses God first, and he tells me that God has said, I would multiply you. He's again using that blessing we've heard several times. That blessing is reiterated by, again, all the patriarchs and God. And he passes this on to the 12. He makes Ephraim and Manasseh equal to Reuben and Issachar. And now those two are considered just like Joseph. So he gives the blessings to them. And so he talks about Rachel dying in up near Euphratah. And he started blessing the sons. And these are my sons whom God has given me. Bring them therefore that I may bless them. And he starts, his eyes are dim. He begins by inaugurating Manasseh and Ephraim into the brotherhood, into the brothers, their uncles. And he goes in to bless them. And Joseph brings them forward. And as he's putting his hands to bless, he puts his right hand over on one child and his left on the other, but his hands, he puts the right hand over on the younger and the left hand on the older. And Joseph's like, wait a minute, no, Father, you're supposed to put the right hand, the power goes to the older. And then the second will serve the older. But he goes, no, it's going to be opposite. There's a little bit of propheticism here, that here again, the younger will serve the older. God gets to decide who serves who. We don't get to decide that as human beings. If God decides to follow a patriarchal line, that's fine. But if he comes in and interjects, this time I'm going to have you serve you, we roll with it. We don't sit and fight. Well, you're being inconsistent. I'm not being inconsistent. I'm God. And so he does that. And this is how he blesses the sons. He inaugurates them then to be just like the uncles. And he blesses them. He blesses Joseph. And he talks about the angel that redeemed me from all evil. Bless these lads, and let their name be named on them and the names of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim, and it displeased him. He tried to move the hands, but his father refused. He goes, I know it, my son, I know it, but he shall be a great people, and he shall also be great. But truly the younger brother shall be greater than he, and his son and his seed shall be multiplied for nations. So again, there's a divine understanding here that Jacob has, that he puts forth to these boys. And he blessed them that day. And in these shall Israel bless, saying, God shall make as Ephraim as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I die, but God be with you, and he will bring you into the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the land of the Amorite, which I took with the sword and with my bow. So the idea that he was also a warrior king. Many of these were also warrior kings. You see where Abraham had warriors around him, and he went in. Remember when there was the battle of the 5 and the 4 kings? I don't know if he got into the battle, but he certainly was a part of it. And here we see Jacob had also claimed some land for himself. This isn't the same as the blessing of God, that God gives the land. Here he's taking a little bit of land for himself, a portion with thy brethren, which I took. In fact, that portion there may not have been land. It may have been bounty. He still had some inheritance. He was still a mighty man. He wasn't hanging around just in a tent with him and his kids standing around. He still was a mighty patriarch in the land. He still had servants. He still had family. He still had, I mean, if you're talking about 70 people and all the support that needs to happen for security and for lambs and for cattle and for education and for medicine and all these things that need to happen to keep this going. So all of that came into Goshen, and all of that became the nation of Israel. So again, you're not just talking about the family of Israel, you're talking about this nation, this grouping of people, although it was led by the patriarch and the boys. But he blesses these two and adds them to the family. Tomorrow we finish Genesis 49 and 50, and tomorrow he starts blessing the sons. Thank you. Bye. Say bye, guys.